I am standing before you, I think, only because a certain... all right, Patty, I'm pressing all the buttons and nothing's happening. There we go. Because a certain gentleman known to me over 30 years, Dan Dennett, had a heart attack and was unable to be here. There he is, having survived. I was supposed to read the letter that he gave to, or sent to Roger in explanation of his absence. But I've since discovered that essentially everybody in the room has read it. So I'm not going to stand between you and lunch and read it again. But it is a shame, given all the wonderful people we've had here, that we didn't also have Dan, because he is a dear and a sweet man, despite the presumption against him, perhaps, for having written a book called Breaking the Spell.
Paul, could I just ask you a question?
Yes,
can we just have a show of hands and see actually who has read it? Because if not...
No, it isn't, in fact, very long. And it's quite entertaining.
I think you should read it. I think it'd be
Then I shall. I shall. I should really have Bill Calvin reading this, since he looks more like Dan than I do, but I'll do my best. Thank goodness I'm alive. October 26, Daniel C. Dennett. A little more than a week ago, I was rushed by ambulance to the Leahy Clinic outside Boston, where it was determined by CT scan that I had a bisected aorta. The lining of the main output vessel carrying blood from my heart had been torn up, creating a two-channel pipe where there should be only one. Fortunately for me, the fact that I'd had a coronary artery bypass graft 7 years ago probably saved my life, since the tangle of scar tissue that had grown like ivy around my heart in the intervening years reinforced the aorta as if it had been wound up with duct tape, preventing catastrophic leakage from the big tear in the aorta itself. After a 9-hour surgery in which my heart was stopped entirely and my body and brain were chilled down to about 45 degrees to prevent brain damage from lack of oxygen until they could get the heart-lung machine pumping, I am now the proud possessor of a new aorta and aortic arch made of strong Dacron fabric tubing sewn into shape on the spot by the surgeon, attached to my heart by a carbon fiber valve that makes a reassuring little click every time my heart beats. I joked with the anesthesiologist, who, like me, is a sailor, saying that with my new Dacron sail and carbon fiber mast, all I needed now was some stainless steel rigging to complete my transformation into a living sailboat. You've already got it, he replied. We put in permanent stainless steel staples to close up your rib cage. Now I'm looking forward to a gentle period of recuperation and reflection, provoked by the flood of supporting messages, cards, visits, and phone calls I'd received since word got out about my latest adventure. Did I have a near-death experience? Did I have any epiphany that perhaps changed my life a little about whether God or an afterlife exists? Yes, I did have an epiphany, but not along the lines some were hoping for. I saw with greater clarity than ever before in my life that when I say thank goodness, this is not merely a euphemism for thank God. Quote, parentheses. We atheists don't believe that there is any God to thank, end parentheses. I really meant thank goodness. There is a lot of goodness in the world, and more goodness every day, and this fantastic human-made fabric of excellence is genuinely and literally responsible for the fact that I am alive today. It is a worthy recipient of the gratitude I feel today, and I want to celebrate that fact here and now. To whom, then, do I owe a debt of gratitude? To Nicholas Saparisis, the cardiologist who has kept me alive and ticking for years, and who swiftly and confidently rejected the original diagnosis of nothing worse than pneumonia. To the surgeon Frank Bowen, who is heroic, conscientious, and indefatigable, assisted by Proveen Menon, and to the anesthesiologists Paul Teague and David Shaft, and the perfusionist Ray DePinto, who, along with several neurologists, kept my system going for many hours under daunting circumstances, and to Brandy Eaton and Todd Schweinwager, just 2 of the dozen or so physician assistants who helped postoperatively, performing such tasks as pulling out of my chest the timing wires leading to my heart, left in case emergency defibrillation was required, and the 4 large drainage tubes, an experience that was not so much painful as simply shocking. And to a specialist cardiac nurse and regular nurse and physical therapist and x-ray technicians and a small army of phlebotomists, so deaf that you hardly knew they were drawing your blood, and the people who brought the meals, kept my room clean, did the mountains of laundry generated by such a messy case, wheelchaired me to x-ray, and so forth. These people came from Uganda, Kenya, Liberia, Haiti, the Philippines, Croatia, Russia, China, Korea, and India, in addition to native-born Americans, and I have never seen more impressive mutual respect, helping each other out, checking each other's work. But for all their teamwork, this local gang could not have done their jobs without the huge background of contributions from others. I remember with gratitude my late friend and Tufts colleague, physicist Alan Cormick, who shared the Nobel Prize for his invention of the CT scanner. Alan, you have posthumously saved yet another life, but who's counting? The world is better for the work you did. Thank goodness. Then there's the whole system of medicine, both the science and the technology, without which the best intentioned efforts of individuals would be roughly useless. So I am grateful to the editorial boards and referees, past and present, of Science, Nature, JAMA, Lancet, and all the other institutions of science and medicine that keep churning out improvements, detecting and correcting flaws. Do I worship modern medicine? Not at all. There's no aspect of modern medicine that I would exempt from the most rigorous scrutiny, and I can readily identify a host of serious problems that still need to be fixed. That's easy to do, of course, because the worlds of medicine and science are already engaged in the most obsessive, intensive, and humble self-assessments yet known to human agency, and they regularly make public the results of their self-examination. You can see where he's going here. One thing in particular struck me as I compared the medical world on which my life now depended with the religious institutions I have been studying so intensively in recent years. One of the gentler, more supportive themes to be found in every religion, so far as I know, is the idea that what really matters is what is in your heart. If you have good intentions and are trying to do what is right, that is all anyone can ask. Not so in medicine. If you are wrong, especially if you should have known better, your good intentions count for almost nothing. And whereas taking a leap of faith and acting without further scrutiny of one's options is often celebrated by religions, it is considered a grave sin in medicine. A doctor whose devout faith in his own revelations about how to treat aortal aneurysm led him to engage in untested trials with human subjects would be severely reprimanded, if not driven out of medicine altogether. In other words, whereas religions may make people more moral than they otherwise would be, that's an open empirical question that I've been trying to find answers to. There is a higher standard to be found in the secular world of science. No religion holds its members to the high standards of moral responsibility that medicine does! Exclamation point. And I'm not just talking about the standards at the top, among the surgeons and doctors who make life or death decisions every day. I'm talking about the standards of conscientiousness endorsed by the lab technicians and meal preparers, too. This tradition puts its faith in the unlimited application of reason and empirical inquiry. Checking and rechecking and getting in the habit of asking, what if I'm wrong? Appeals to faith or membership are never tolerated. Imagine the reception a scientist would get if he tried to suggest that others couldn't replicate his results because they just didn't share the faith of the people in his lab. And to return to my main point, it is the goodness of this tradition of reason. It is the goodness of this tradition of reason and open inquiry that I thank for my being alive today. Concluding paragraph. What, though, do I say to those of my religious friends, and yes, I have quite a lot of religious friends, who have had the courage and honesty to tell me that they've been praying for me? I have gladly forgiven them, of course, for there are few circumstances more frustrating than not being able to help a loved one in any more direct way, and I confess to regretting that I could not pray sincerely for my friends and family in need of time. I translate my religious friends' remarks readily enough into a version of what my fellow Brights have been telling me. Quote, I've been thinking about you and wishing with all my heart, another ineffective but irresistible self-indulgence, that you come through this okay. The fact that these dear friends have been thinking of me in this way and have taken an effort to let me know is in itself, without any need for a supernatural boost, a wonderful tonic. I can say that these messages from my dear family and from my friends around the world would have been literally heartwarming in my case, and I am grateful for the boost in morale to truly manic heights, I fear, boost in morale that it has produced in me. But I am not joking when I say that I have to forgive my friends who say that they are praying for me. I feel about that, taken literally, the same way I would feel if one of them said, I've just paid a voodoo doctor to cast a spell for your health. Or, I've been spending the afternoon in a seance hoping to contact your dead ancestors so that they can put in a good word for you with the keeper of the underworld, end quote. Surely, though, it does no harm if those who can do so pray for me. I'm not at all sure about that. For one thing, if they really wanted to do something useful, they could devote their prayer time and energy to some pressing object that they can do something about. For another, we now have quite solid grounds, for example, the recently released Benson study at Harvard, for believing that intercessory prayer simply doesn't work. And anybody whose practice shrugs off that research is subtly undermining respect for the very goodness I am thanking. If you insist on keeping the myth of the effectiveness of prayer alive, you owe the rest of us a justification in the face of the evidence. Pending such a justification, I will excuse you for indulging in your tradition. I know how comforting tradition can be, but I don't want you to continue to think that what you are doing is morally unproblematic. Like tenacious scientists who resist the evidence for theories they don't like long after a graceful concession would have been appropriate, I applaud you for your loyalty to your own position, but remember, loyalty is not enough. You've got to keep asking yourself, what if I'm wrong? I think religious people can be asked to live up to the same standards as people in science and medicine. Dan Dennett.
Thank you.
Now can I tell them that I'm not going to keep them from lunch?
Well, there's just some more coffee and stuff out there. So,
okay.
What I actually need to do, because Richard Sloan has to leave early, is I'm going to suggest that we take a brief break here. Let me just add one comment, the Dacron sailing and the stuff and so on. I then sent an email to Dan which said that it reminded me of Otto von Neurath's comment that science was a bit like a sailboat, a bit like a boat, that to be rebuilt had to be rebuilt plank by plank while still afloat. And I said that thought that perhaps that should be applied also to scientists and bearded philosophers. Now, I hadn't realized at the time when I said that that's quoted so often by Quine, who was, of course, Dan's great mentor, wasn't he?
Yes, but Dan tried to break the attachment to Quine. He said, once said, I went to Oxford to refute Quine. But yes, Quine had an enormous influence on him.
Okay. So can we take a very brief break now, just 15 minutes, because Richard Sloan, having just heard about prayer and its effects, I think coming back to hear Richard Sloan on this will be very apposite. So could we get back here in about 15 minutes?